My name is José-Ricardo Presman. I'm having a solo show at the Amos Eno Gallery, 191 Henry Street on the Lower East Side of New York. My show runs from the end of April till June 7th. And the title of the show is A Mountain Overlooking a Home by the Lake. And the second part of the title is The Creation of Time from the State of Duration. Most artist talks start with the artist, with their influences, their style changes over time, and so on. Instead of starting from myself as an artist, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to start from the periphery or a periphery and work my way in. All right. Now I'm an older artist at the twilight of my career, I guess you can say. And when you're a certain age, when you get past a certain age, you ask yourself certain questions about, about everything, about the whole universe. So there will be less talk about art and more talk about history, the cosmos, theology, science, but just short snippets. All right. So a question that has come up in the last 20 years is the question of why is there something rather than nothing? All right. That's a question that I'm going to state is wrongly framed, and I'm going to explain why in two ways. When you use the word nothing, that insinuates that there's something that differentiates itself from nothing. So if you speak about above, there's a below. If you're inside, there's an outside. So there's no such thing as absolute nothing without something being intertwined with it. Let me see where I am here. And I'm going to try to describe this in two different ways. If you think that there's an absolute beginning to things and an absolute end to things, you're framing the question incorrectly, because in order for there to be an absolute beginning to the world, to the cosmos, and eventually possibly an absolute end to the cosmos, the element of time has to be in effect. The fourth dimension, which is time, has to be in effect. But there's a point in the past when time itself was first created, and there's going to be a time in the future when time will be destroyed. But before time was created, and subsequent to time being destroyed, there's still existence. There's existence before time, there's existence after time. So how could things evolve? How could things move on and on and on like the universe does without this fourth dimension of time? How do things happen? And it's very difficult to describe that. You would have to say that events take place in a state of duration or in a state of simultaneity. And what is it that takes place in this other dimension beyond time? It's consciousness, it's awareness. So you can call awareness or consciousness a fifth dimension. Then there's a sixth dimension, which you can call self-consciousness, which is another sixth dimension, which I'm going to just barely touch on it. Okay, better keep these out. Yeah, I consider that everything is changing, always changing and evolving, not on a straight line, but in a kind of a zigzag. It always moves forward, but not in a straight line, in a kind of a zigzag line. There was a pre-Socratic philosopher by the name of Heraclitus. And Heraclitus is famous for the statement that you can't walk into the same river twice. In fact, the second time, you're not even the same person. Now, Heraclitus had a student by the name of Cratylus. And Cratylus, I'm going to write his name here, Cratylus took that statement one step further and said, you can't even take a step into the same river once, right? From thought to act, it's already moved on. Now, Cratylus, who was a priest at the Temple of Diana in Ephesus, which is in present-day Turkey, Cratylus was said to be so wise and so profound that he didn't answer questions verbally. He simply raised a finger, and everything you needed to know was in that gesture. But nobody ever tells you which finger. So anyway, that's my little attempt at pre-Socratic humor. All right, so so I said that in order for there to be a beginning, the element of time has to extend itself to before there was such a thing as time. Now, I'm going to describe this in a different way. The writer of Genesis, Moses, right, going back to the Old Testament, we're all familiar with the first sentence. I'll write it down just in case. In the beginning, all right, so I'm just going to write this down. In the beginning, I think that's how you spell it, God created heaven and earth. Heaven and earth. Now, in Hebrew, in the original Hebrew, the word beginning has much, much more meaning than the English translation. The word God has a very different meaning than the word translated into English. Now, the Hebrew original word for beginning is the word Bereshit. The word for God, in this case, created, is the word bara. The word for God is the word Elohim. You may have heard this term before. So Bereshit refers to beginning, and Elohim refers to God, but it's in a very watered down form. Now, when the Old Testament transitioned into the New Testament in Greek, it was in the Greek language for the most part, the word for beginning is the word arche. And the word in Greek for God, this particular series of gods actually, is the word exousia. So in going back to the Old Testament, you have Bereshit and Elohim. Bereshit translates into arche in Greek and into beginning in English. Elohim translates into the Greek word exousia, which in English is translated very weakly as the word God. All right, so see if you can stay with me here. I'm going to start somewhere else, and I'm going to come back to all this. In the first century, there was an individual by the name of Dionysius the Areopagite. I'm going to write this here. Dionysius the Areopagite. I'm not going to go into why he was called the Areopagite. Dionysius, who was a student of St. Paul, the biblical Paul, is the man who systematized the 9 celestial hierarchies between human beings and the Trinity that we now call in the West Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Father, Son, Holy Ghost. So in between humans, in this Trinity, this male Holy Trinity of Father, Son, Holy Ghost, there are 9 celestial hierarchies which he systematized. So the first hierarchy, the first celestial hierarchy, we know as the word angels, or angeloi in Greek. The second tier of these celestial hierarchies are called archangels, or archangeloi. The third and fourth are called arche and exousia. So when Moses was referring to the beginning, he wasn't referring to the beginning of everything, and he wasn't referring to the God of everything. He was referring to the third and the fourth celestial hierarchies of the 9 between human beings and the male Holy Trinity. All right? So I just wanted to point that out. So I want to go a little bit closer to our time. We're living in a cultural epoch, which is epoch, E-P-O-C-H, it has a hub in Western Europe, just like the previous cultural epoch was centered around Greece and eventually Rome, the Greco-Roman age. We're living in a Western, Northern, Central European cultural age. It's not the Americas, it's not Asia, it's not Africa, it's not Eastern Europe, it's Western Europe. But because of certain circumstances that took place around the first third of the 20th century, that focal point shifted from Western Europe to the United States, but only for a cycle. The cycle began, you can say, in 1945 at the end of World War II, and I'm going to say that it ended already. The United States is no longer the hub of Western culture starting around 2017 or so. So it's a 72-year cycle. And I'm going to point out other cycles that last 72 years because you might think that this is all pure superstition. So now, for example, if you average it out over long periods of time, the heart beats approximately 72 beats per minute, more or less, right? If you average it out over many, many millions of years, over millions of people, many thousands of years, the average lifespan of a person is about 72 years, right? Now I'm gonna illustrate something else that happens in the cosmos, right? When the sun rises every morning, it rises a little bit behind the 12 constellations around us, and which are symbolized in the 12 symbols of the right. What is that called? All right. So every time that the sun rises, it falls just a little bit behind, until eventually it goes all around all 12 constellations, and goes back to a sort of a starting point. Now, every time that the sun falls behind 1 degree of this 360-degree circle, 72 years have passed. So here you have a cosmological fact that correlates with how many times per minute the heart beats, the average lifespan of human beings over many, many years. I'll give you another statistic. You take approximately 18 breaths per minute if you average it out, 18 breaths per minute. In an hour, you take more or less, give or take, 1,080 breaths. Now, in the course of 24 hours, you take approximately 25,920 breaths in a year. I'm sorry, in a day. So now, if you take each degree that the sun falls behind, and you go all the way around the 12 constellations around us, multiply 72 times 360 degrees of the circle, which is called a Platonic year, you have 25,920 years. So there's a correlation between what goes on inside, what goes on outside, and what happens in the cosmos as a whole. So now going back to what's happening in the United States, all right? In around 1945, the focal point in Western Europe shifted to the United States around 1945. In 2017, our president had his first shift. subtract one from the other, and you get 72 years. So the American cycle, I'm going to say, started in 1945, peaked, as all cycles peaked here, and then it had its descent. It has an ascent, like every cycle has. It has a descent in 2017. Now, what is this peak? The peak is halfway between 1945 and 2017, which is 1981. So it's 36 years ascending and 36 years descending. And of course, in 1981, it was Ronald Reagan who took over and shifted everything upside down. He took money away from mental institutions so that people had no help, who weren't able to cope. He reduced the tax rate for corporations from 70% to 28%. He allowed tens of thousands of people to die of AIDS because he didn't want to recognize. He thought it was all about gay people and about sex, and they wanted to hide all this. So the turnaround happened around 1981, 36 years into the ascent, and then the final descent happened in the following 36 years and culminated in Donald Trump's first presidency. All right, so I'm going to say America as a hub started here, the end of World War II, and ended with the first year of the first Trump administration. So that's a cycle. The universe operates in cycles, except there's something in the universe. There has to be something. You have to be open enough to accept the idea that there's some things that don't have a cycle. What happens when there are no cycles? Before time, there was no such thing as cycles because there was no beginning or end. Well, the whole universe has no cycle. The universe as a whole has no beginning and no end. It sounds dogmatic, but in a short talk like this, that's all I can say. So the universe as a whole, I want to repeat this, doesn't have a beginning, an absolute beginning, or an absolute end, because you need time, the fourth dimension of time, to have a beginning and an end, to have a cycle. So in the fifth dimension, which is consciousness, and eventually in the sixth dimension, which is self-consciousness, there's no such thing as cycles. It's not even infinity or eternity. Infinity implies the third dimension of space, and projective synthetic geometry has accepted that as a reality, infinity. In the fourth dimension, you have eternity. The fourth dimension of time is included here. But in the fifth and sixth dimension, there are no limits. So there's no beginning and no end to the cosmos. All right, so I wanted to get that out of the way. If you have any questions, like how I got the title, A Mountain Overlooking a Home by the Lake, that was a coincidence that happened to me. I read everything I can get my hands on, even toothpaste tubes, anything I'll grab and read. And at the time, a year ago, I was reading lectures on the four Gospels. And in the Gospel of St. Mark, so here's the theology part. In the Gospel of St. Mark, there's a reference to events that take place on a mountain, events that take place in a home inside, and events that take place on a lake. At the same time, I went to my computer and there was a screensaver. And the picture on the screensaver was a mountain in the background, some trees, and then a home that was on the edge of a lake. And so I just put those two together, and I used that as the title. The second part, well, I already talked about the state of duration, how there's a point where time is created and a point in the future when time is destroyed. Now, as to what or who or how time was created, you can figure that out, but it takes many, many, many years. It involves things that you, in order to understand how and why time was created, by whom, you need to understand many other things beforehand. And before you could understand those many, many other things beforehand, you need to learn the methods by which you could understand those other things beforehand. And the best method that I can think of is a continuation of what's called anthroposophical. I'm going to write it down here. Anthroposophical spiritual science. A continuation of anthroposophical spiritual science. So when you talk about the word spirit, people, or God, people get a little shaky. They don't want to hear it. Now, I spoke about a sixth dimension. All right, this will put an end to the. This will be the closing. When I spoke about the fourth dimension doesn't include the dimension of space. So the fourth dimension is actually two-dimensional. It loses a dimension. The fifth dimension, which I called consciousness, loses yet another dimension, so it's one-dimensional. And self-consciousness, the sixth dimension, has no dimensions, so it's like a point. So if you could imagine a point which has no dimensions, whereby the whole universe intersects at this point, and there's nothing besides this point. There's no above or below, there's no left or right, inside or outside, there's nothing but a zero-dimensional point where everything intersects. Now you have an idea of the sixth dimension of self-consciousness, besides the fifth dimension of consciousness. And again, the sixth dimension has no dimensions. It loses the last dimension and is dimensionless. So that's the. Yeah, I'll stop there. And if you have anything, I'm sure that you have a question here and there, because I introduced material which maybe you've never heard before. Shoot. These things, these cycles, which are really, they're outshoots of the original intent. The original intent was for all purposes, was that this cultural epoch that we're living in since the Renaissance was centered in Western Europe, Western, Northern, Central Europe. And it should go back there. That's where it belongs. Because of what happened around World War II, just before, in 1933, especially with Hitler and fascism and what happened in Russia, that shifted to the United States just for one small cycle, 72 years. And then now it goes back to Western Europe. Now in 2016 and 2024, the United States population voted for Trump. So the population had a choice. It could dissolve the United States as that focal point of Western culture. It could have dissolved constructively by voting in Kamala Harris, or it could vote so that the United States as a center of Western culture dissolves destructively. Constructively or destructively? Well, it chose destructively. And that's what Trump is doing here. So don't expect, now the United States of America, USA, will make a comeback many, many, many years from now. But it'll be a whole different situation in between Western European culture and this last, I'm going to call it the last, seventh and last cultural epoch where America returns. It's going to be very short and very destructive, and it'll be a mini apocalypse. everybody will be fighting everybody else. Men against women, black against white, young against old, rich against poor. So it's not going to last very long. In between this, I'm going to call it the 7th cultural epoch, and the one we're living through now, which is the 5th cultural epoch, there's one in between. And the focal point there will be Eastern Europe. So the 4th is the Greco-Roman era. The 5th is the one we're living in since the Renaissance. The 6th will be the Eastern European, and the 7th will be short-lived, and there'll be mayhem, I guarantee you. Another little fact. Every time that the sun falls behind 1 degree, I mentioned, 72 years have passed. Every time that the sun falls behind one constellation of the 12 constellations, 2,160 years have passed. Now, you can position, for example, the Greco-Roman era as starting with the first thinkers, the first philosophers, around, I'm going to say 747 BC. And the Renaissance, you can, these aren't hard and fast numbers because we're not living in a machine world, we're humans. You can say that the Greco-Roman era finally ended around 1413 AD. So that's a period of 2,160 years. So that's how that correlates also. I spoke about the sun losing 72, every 72 years it loses 1 degree and falls behind 1 degree of this Platonic year of 25,920 years. Originally, the sun and the 12 constellations traveled at the same speed. When humans first appeared, that's when the sun lost a little bit of time. And coincidentally or not coincidentally, it lost 1 degree every 72 years, which is a human lifespan if you average it out. All right, so that's just another statistic. And I don't want to get too exact about this, but if our era began in 1413, move ahead 2,160 years from now, and you have the end of our era, more or less around 3573, if things go not too crazy, because this, our world could end in a flash, now that we have crazy people running countries. So, but this is the original, let's say the original intention overall. So around this time, that's when Eastern Europe will become the focal point of the focal point of culture, the central point of culture in the world. I'm sorry I took so long. You have any other, and by the way, the reason why, that's the reason why there's a saying that the human beings were born out of time. In other words, the sun lost 72 years each degree, and human beings appeared and are living a lifespan of 72 years on the average. So that's how the saying came about. And so there you go, another little statistic there, using numbers. Okay. When it comes to art, the best explanation of the creative process comes from a statement that Marcel Duchamp made. In 1957, he was part of a 4-person symposium on art, on creativity. So there were, I believe, 2 educators, a psychologist, Rudolf Arnheim, and there was what Duchamp called the mere artist, Marcel Duchamp. And it's online. You can print it out, or you can listen to him actually speaking that address. 1957, Houston, Texas, this 4-person symposium on creativity. Now, one of the things he mentioned was something that he stated from a story that T.S. Eliot wrote. T.S. Eliot wrote a short story on tradition and individual talent. And among the things he said was the more perfect the artist, the more separate in him will be the man who suffers and the mind which creates. The more perfectly then will the mind digest and transform the passions which are its material. All right? So for the most part, people in the art world, people who are in the middle of a creative process, don't know why they make this decision as opposed to that decision. In that sense, the art ends up being greater than the artist and anything that the artist can say about it. And in fact, anything that the artist says is misleading because it encourages people to see things a certain way, when in fact, the viewer and the participant has to interpret the work, not ask to understand anything, because there's a lot of people, including many, many artists, who think this way, that the artist is trying to say something, and then the viewer is supposed to figure out what that something is. And none of that is reality. It doesn't happen that way. The creative act doesn't take place that way. So, well, what I did in this artwork, I'm just going to describe what I did. I took 5 panels times 7. So there's 7 artworks. Each one has 5 canvas panels. So the panels are sort of a neutral shape if you put all 5 of them together horizontally and vertically. And they're stable. They're a geometric shape. And to contrast that, I used very, very watered down acrylic paints and painted the canvas so that you could almost not even see the colors. The shape you can see right away, and like that, you can see it instantaneously in all 7 artworks. But the color, in order to see any of the color in any of these 7 paintings, you have to concentrate on the piece, you have to concentrate on the canvas, you have to meditate on it, maybe for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and all kinds of things will emerge, all different kinds of colors. There's even areas which I didn't even touch. There's no paint on it. It's white canvas. But when you look at it, you'll see an after image of a color, and you'll see color where I didn't even paint any color. So I did 7 pieces altogether, 6 that are one size, and a larger, slightly larger piece that's here. So there's 7 pieces altogether. 6 are the same size, and the 7th is, in a sense, you can say, the way it's positioned, and because it's larger, it's kind of leading the other 6, addressing the other 6, and there's really there's not much that insinuates something else. I'm reminded of the figure by Da Vinci, the man that stands with arms stretched and legs apart, but then the top half, the top of the body is a little bit longer than, a little bit shorter than below the arms. So it's not even that. But don't take my word for it. Interpret it your own way. So there's no meaning behind the 5, except that it just makes things geometrical.